I'd like to tell you about my experience with this case study. Several years ago, I was running an LGBT youth center in Ogden, Utah. And every month we would have a special event where the youth from our center would speak in public, usually at a library, about a current event or something that was happening in the news. What was happening that month was new legislation that had been passed about bullying in Utah schools. It was anti-bullying legislation that called for parents to be notified if their child was bullied. And that seemed to the general public, oh, what a great idea. But as someone who worked with LGBT youth, I knew that that could mean that a child could get outed, and that perhaps if the child was LGBT and their parents didn't know, and a principal or someone called and told them, that the child could even get kicked out of their home, because so many of the youth that I worked with were homeless because they were kicked out. So I had an event and we had youth speak about it. And the next day I had a phone call, and it was from the office of a Utah legislator, Gage Frower, and he wanted me to come visit him in his office. And I was, well, I'll be honest, it felt like I was being called to the principal's office. I was really nervous about it, but okay. Thought I can do this. His office was in Ogden, and I would just go over there. So I went over there and Gage was sitting behind his desk, looking very proper. And he said, "Well, I hear you don't like my legislation." And so I admit I was feeling not only nervous now, but a little defensive and thinking, okay, what's going to happen here? So I started to explain about, well, I work with LGBT youth, and some of them, not only are they bullied, but they could be outed to their parents and be kicked out of the home and be homeless in Utah. And Gage said, well, we don't have homeless youth in Utah. And at that point, a woman who was sitting near Gage spoke up and said, we don't have homeless youth in Utah. And I said, well, actually, yes, there are homeless youth in Utah. So we kind of went back and forth. And I said, well, come to my LGBT center and meet some of them. And I thought, well, they're not going to take me up on this, because, and now I'll be honest, I'm a Christian pastor, I'm a Protestant person, and I had moved to Utah a few years earlier. And I didn't really have any Mormon friends. And I kind of had this perception that all Latter-day Saints were homophobic. This was right after Prop 8 and all of the press about that. And so I thought, well, they're not going to care. They won't come. Well, by golly, they did. So Laura came to my center and we were talking. And while we were talking, a young boy came by and he started filling his knapsack with canned food and clean socks and different things. And Laura started chatting with him, and come to find out he was homeless, 12 years old, and he was filling a backpack full of canned goods and socks for other members of his street family. And at that point, I could just see Laura's face change, that not only did she know that there were homeless youth in Utah, but she cared about them. And she no longer was it about, okay, LGBT, this, that, or the other. It was about kids who were homeless. And it was at that point that my heart started to change too, because I could see Laura's face. So Laura, off she went. She said, I'm going to do something. And I thought, well, okay, I don't know what she's going to do. Well, the next week, this tractor trailer flatbed 18-wheeler pulled up in our parking lot. We had a small parking lot, and somehow this truck pulled in. It was piled high with hundreds of coats, because it was cold then, and it was November, and Laura knew that these youth didn't have warm coats. So she'd arranged with her friends to get donations. And that was just the start of my not only working with Laura and with Gage Frower, but becoming friends with them. Gage came to our center too. And when we had events, Gage would speak at the events. Laura and I started speaking together. And then we ended up drafting legislation together that was passed so that there could be shelters for youth, because that was part of the problem. If you were a homeless youth in Utah and you weren't with your parents, there was no shelter for you. You'd have to live outside. Some youth lived in the canyons or in abandoned buildings. And so Laura Engage changed that. And my life changed because of that. And the lives of so many youth changed because of that. My perception of Mormons being scary and homophobic and all kinds of things, all of that changed because of a personal friendship that I had. And my life changed, and then my work changed. I'm still, what I care about is LGBT youth being safe, all LGBT people having access to God, and for all people to know each other and to realize that not only can we be friends, we can work together, and we can work together to change the world. Laura, to this day, is my dear friend, and I am so grateful to her and to Gage. Thank you.